Hello, hello, and welcome to the MWCC podcast, Missouri's mic for environmental experts. Today we're joined by Babs Garcia, principal geologist and environmental consultant. Babs brings 16 years of experience leading complex site characterization, regulatory negotiations, and hazardous waste remediation efforts across Missouri and the surrounding region. She's managed environmental cleanup projects from tank sites to wood treating facilities undergoing RCRA post-closure care. Babs is also the past chair of the Springfield-Greene County Environmental Advisory Board and currently serves as the treasurer of the Association of Missouri Geologists. Babs, welcome to the MWCC podcast. How you doing today?
Really good. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Well, could you start by telling us a little bit about your background, what inspired you to pursue geology and environmental consulting, and what kind of work you're mostly focused on today?
Well, starting with what got me where I am, as you said, I am a geologist. I didn't really know I was going to go into geology as a young person, but maybe should have known because I've always, liked being outside and even as a little kid, really enjoyed rocks. That's my understanding. Actually, most kids really like rocks, so that's not that big of a stretch. Went into geology in college and at the time didn't really think about environmental consulting so much. I thought I would actually stay in academia. Had plans at one point in time of being a volcanologist, so not many volcanoes around here. Ended up actually staying in Missouri, and my first job actually outside of grad school was environmental works, and really so kind of falling into the profession, not directly, knowing that was what I wanted to do. It absolutely fits. So the protecting of the environment or a cleanup of the environment, that just always seemed like a good fit.
Nice. I can confirm I have a 14-month-old and he loves rocks.
Right? I have nephews and they just, they want to look at sparkly things. It's fun. I have these display shelves of rocks and, people have kids and they come over and like, oh, can they touch those? And I'm like, yeah, dude, they're not going to hurt them. That rocks might hurt the kid more than the other way around. I think it's a fun way to introduce people to a thing that, that I really like. People often say like, hey, what kind of rock is this? Or what kind of gem is this? And I just have to laugh and like, I don't know. It's shiny. It's pretty. I'm not that kind of geologist, but no, the common mineral specimens, I can identify.
Yes, that's better than myself for sure. And do you have like a tumbler or do you ever get into polishing or anything like that? I've got two older kids who like to do that kind of fun stuff and we go find them and polish them up or crack open geodes.
I haven't gotten to the tumbling of rocks. I kind of let nature tumble rocks if I want them to be rounded.
Nice.
Walking
Find them in the
around
creek.
stream beds, yeah. But cracking open a hopefully it's a geode. Sometimes you're just bashing open a rock and have a lackluster moment of like, "Oh, okay." But yeah, I've tortured my fair share of rocks.
Nice. Do you have a sweet like geologist hammer that they sell in those little catalogs they'll send to your house sometimes?
Well, I think it's obligatory.
Okay, good to hear.
Yeah. Although I went on a field trip with the Association of Missouri Geologists a couple months ago, and I didn't bring that rock hammer, and I was like, like a rookie mistake, because it's a good chance they actually do a lot of we're going to different places on a field trip, and actually, if you see a group of folks hammering on a outcrop as you're driving down the road, it's probably a geologist or a class of geology, and I don't do it all the time for work. Because again, that's not the kind of geology that I practice, but gotta bash on a rock, try to get a fresh surface, see if there's any fossils in there.
I wouldn't think twice if I saw a group of folks with hammers on rocks on the side of the highway, but I work in this industry.
It's our industry, yeah.
Yeah,
I wave at
definitely.
them.
Where was your field trip to?
This last field trip, we were in the St. Francis region,
Nice.
so it was Precambrian geology. Very cool feature of Missouri is that, in the southeast part of the state, we have some of the oldest rocks that, on the surface of the earth. And so those are a lot of it's a volcanics from that area. So yeah, we stopped by, and those are actually, I think you have to have a specialized rock hammer to break into some of the volcanics. But that's. And this next year, they do a field trip every year. So I'll plug, we're already planning for our next year's trip, which will also be southwest part of Missouri, but instead of being in Precambrian rock, it will be in a very karst area.
Nice. Nice. So
Stay
in the St.
tuned.
Francis, were you by like Fredericktown and the old lead mines and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, actually, that was part of the one of the stops was actually in Fredericktown. So definitely shapes part of that whole part of the state and the industry too is the history of lead mining.
I am not a geologist nor a native Missourian, but I lived here now, and I had the title once the field geologist in my career. So I could
Hey,
appreciate both. And, living in the Ozarks, there's no shortage of awesome geology to check out around here.
well, right, yeah. And if you're not into the karst, there's something else that this area offers. Now you go north of the Missouri River, and your options for checking out rocks on the surface start to decrease. But
You might as well be in Iowa up there.
it's really just an extension of Iowa.
Yeah. Well, I guess I won't touch that any further at
Yeah.
this
Oh,
point.
watch out! I want to
Yeah,
isolate half of your audience.
definitely, definitely. So, you kind of touched on what sparked your interest in geology. Do you also have an interest in maps? I seen you were a geography in your master's, and I'm a map geek myself with a geography background. But
Well, they that was part of the department at the time, geography, geology, and planning. So, as much as I would love to say that, I have a particular interest, that's not so much my academic specialty. I think at the time they were also focusing on making sure that as a geospatial scientist, you understood that, I'm giving away my age a little bit, but like that we were going to go from a time from like hand drawing all of maps to GIS representation, features and data on a map. So actually there was a GIS component of my master's degree, but the maps that I did in college were mostly gravity and magnetic maps, and gives me some cold chills just to remember that.
okay, fair enough. I have a GIS background too. I've never used it in the environmental business, but it was fun to do during college for sure.
Yeah, I know just enough now to be able to ask the folks who make the maps of the kind of things that I want and need, and I understand a well-made map and how important that is. I mean, there's just like a good infographic, right? There's a lot of
Great.
data that you can get on there.
And you know what a shapefile is and a vector and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, except for I used the term raster recently, and someone's like, they don't call it that anymore. And I'm
Oh,
like,
really?
well, yeah.
Okay, I'm showing my age too because I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong.
Nice, nice. And so what do you find the most challenging working here in Missouri with our complex geology of Precambrian and karst and then, Iowa farm fields?
Well, yeah, right. I have spent a lot of time. I am here in Southwest Missouri, so I have spent a lot of time working on sites that have karst. The part of the job that I do, and I think about environmental consulting, there's a lot of different things you can do. So I work, the team that I'm in, as we call it remediation, but essentially the release has already happened. There's already contamination in the ground. The tanker truck has flipped over, or the pipeline has ruptured, or, something has happened. And our role is the, kind of that investigator role of like, what's there? How far did it go? And what are the risks associated with that? Is it in just the soil? Is it in bedrock? Is it in the groundwater aquifer? So yeah, and I think working in this part of the state, the karst plays a particular role in making that interesting. You can have things travel a lot further than they would if have a karst environment where, maybe it can get in and travel a half a mile in a matter of hours or days, which is
Hit a
really
sinkhole or
remarkable.
spring or something like that and
Right.
just keep running?
Yeah. And I've seen it, and that's obviously a particular challenge. It poses a particular challenge too with when you think of remediation, because not that we do a lot of remediation by dig and haul, but that's certainly a thing you can do.
So
Spill on
good
the
luck in
ground.
the Ozarks digging. I had to this weekend. I dug a trench. No, thank you. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Encountering all the chert that we
yeah. Oh
have
yeah.
every yeah.
I was swinging my pickaxe and hitting that shovel pretty hard. Thankfully, I borrowed an excavator for most of the trench, but there was some handle in there. Yeah.
Yeah. My husband's from New York, or lived a lot of his life in New York. He was like, you could dig a hole in places. And here he's like,
Not
I'm going
here.
to just dig this short trench. And like 3 hours later, a foot and a half wide. And
Yep.
it's not for the faint of heart.
No, that struggle is real. I learned that trying to put a field fence in once. It's definitely real.
Yeah.
So, and if for the audience who might not know what karst is, would you mind giving us a quick primer on that?
Absolutely. So when we talk about karst, it is referring to a topography or terrain or landform, but it's essentially in an area that it has certain kinds of features, sinkholes, springs. It's typified by a bedrock that is soluble. So in our case, we have limestone, And along joints and fractures, that limestone has started to dissolve. And that's where you get cave formations. And on the surface, karst terrain, you're going to have losing streams, gaining streams, sinkholes, and obviously caves in the subsurface. So it really does affect the way that water moves and interacts between surface, things happening at the surface and things in the subsurface.
Nice. Yeah, I hadn't known until I moved here that Missouri is the cave state. More caves than any state in the union, from what I
I'm pretty
understand.
sure that Kentucky challenges that. So there's like a rivalry between the two.
Well, they have bourbon, we have caves. We'll just kind of
Yeah,
leave it
you're
at
like,
that.
come on.
Yes, yeah.
Otherwise, we're a show me state. Like, we just have our skepticism. What?
There you go. And Jesse Jane. You can't
Oh,
skip
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
that's true.
definitely. So what's been a project that has stretched you the most working in these karst environments and throughout the state?
It just stretched me the most. I actually didn't think about that. The project that comes to mind that was like, I think, a good turning point in my career, about midpoint, I had been working on a lot of sites and starting to feel more comfortable as a project geologist and as an environmental consultant. The company I work for, Environmental Works, does emergency response work. And so one project that we had 7 or 8 years ago was a pipeline release that happened at the substation and in the middle of nowhere, and
Of course,
we're
on
part of it.
Christmas Eve in the cold, usually.
Yeah, it's all, yeah, on a
Yeah,
weekend,
I'm
on
no
a Friday
stranger to
at
those.
5. Yeah. In the middle of nowhere, no cell phone service. And as part of that response, the client is actually forward thinking enough to know, like, well, we're going to need to get a geologist out there to figure this out sooner or later. So they were like, yeah, just get out there and be a part of that initial emergency response. Usually when there's that initial spill, something like that happens, the idea is stop it from moving and clean up what you can, keep it from getting into the environment. In this case, before the environmental response team could get there, the local fire department got there, and in an attempt, I believe, to reduce the possibility of a fire, I'm not quite sure, hosed the whole area down. So what does that do but just like spread out petroleum and, of course, on a hillside, so there was a stream nearby. It ended up being, I don't know, probably 10 days of some intensive field work, but so I was part of it from the very beginning, and actually pretty early on realized that I wasn't just there, like being googly eyed and taking notes, but actually helping to identify like the different layers of the subsurface, because there was a really sandy layer at the surface, but then below that there was several feet of clay. And so pretty early on we're like, don't dig into that clay, because that actually is keeping that material from going down, but create some kind of barrier further downhill to stop it. So it actually was cool. I was like, oh, I actually was a part of the team of coming up with a solution that eventually resulted in heading it off. Headed off at the pass. We were able
Nice.
to keep from going directly into the stream. And obviously with any type of a spill, there's always further investigation and monitoring wells that are installed, and things take time from there on. But yeah, that was a good stretch. And I think being the geologist in charge on that site, at first I was like, don't look at me, I don't know.
The
But I mean,
GIC, huh? Is that what
but I did know, I knew more than I gave myself credit for. So I think that stretched me because it wasn't necessarily my comfort zone at the time, but I was communicating with the client, with the other geologist and folks at my office, the other team members, fish and wildlife, because we had to take down some trees, and it was bad habitat, and you had to talk with MDNR because it was an active emergency response. Lots of very very dynamic site and experience, and I think that was a good one. I think to say I was stretched would be appropriate.
very, very cool project. And I take it that local fire department didn't realize that, you could still light oil on fire on top of water, a la Lake Erie, Cuyahoga River.
The Cuyahoga River, like, yeah. It's sad that happens every now and then, but hopefully not as common.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for sharing that. That is definitely an interesting project. I've been on a few emergency responses, and as I noted, they're always the coldest day of the year, the day before a holiday,
Yep.
sometime at night, and in a hard to get to place. Is just kind of how it works in my career, at least, for sure.
Murphy's Law applies. Yeah.
Oh yeah, every time almost. So, and then can you share a time that you had to creatively navigate compliance, where it wasn't
Hmm.
just cut and dry, straightforward by the book? You had to come up with a solution to fit the situation.
Yeah, actually, so I think a good example of that, I've worked on sites where we manage a pump and treat system, and those systems are pulling groundwater from an area. And, the case that comes to mind is it's a pretreatment before it's discharged to the local POTW. And those systems can be to remove contaminants from the ground. And in this case, this system had like two objectives. Another objective was hydraulic containment. So we want hydraulic control is probably a better term to kind of keep groundwater from migrating offsite. And maybe think there was like 10 wells in a particular area, and as it always is, things age, equipment breaks down, and not all 10 of these wells working, top peak performance. And they really just couldn't keep up with, the hydraulic and maintain hydraulic control. And we worked at, evaluating the effectiveness of the different pumping wells, and based on their cones of depression that they were able to pull in around them, and identified that like maybe two or three of those, if they were operating, could really carry the workload for the rest of that area. And so that's where you're talking with clients, and in this case, regulators, about, hey, if we focus our energy and resources, that is, money and time, and get these three wells really like optimized, that that's likely to be able to carry the workload for that whole area, and actually ended up being successful. So I definitely can't take credit for that. I wasn't the one out there like rebuilding a well, but certainly part of the team of understanding like the dynamics and of a particular well, and its placement and the way it was constructed, having more likelihood to be of a stronger influence on the system.
Nice, nice. And as a
Yeah.
question for me, I work across the Midwest. Now, is Missouri a state where if you're going to site closure, you have to look at offsite conditions as well before you can receive closure? I know, like going from west to east, Illinois, you don't have to look at offsite. Indiana, you do. So it's a patchwork here in the U.S. But
Yeah, and I think, and I it depends on maybe some specifics, but general, like we're kind of a start where the release or issue is and then work out. So I've received closure on sites before that didn't go off site in their physical investigation, but they definitely went, off site in that, is there a sinkhole or a drinking water well in a certain radius around a site? So you have to understand and identify those things. But as far as testing, if you have I guess, a point of delineation on site, you're not necessarily moving off site to continue that investigation.
is there a case where, say, your point of delineation isn't found on site, where they make you go get some access to the neighbor's property if you can and kind of look what's going on over there?
I've been involved in my fair share of stepping off site to find that point of delineation. Sometimes that's a property and that's someone that you can get a hold of, and sometimes it's commercial. It's a lot harder sometimes to even get that access at times. And sometimes our offsite is like, I've worked on sites where the immediate adjacent property is a several 100-foot wide road with another several hundred feet of right of way on either side. And essentially we say like, okay, well, we don't really need to go what feels like way, way, way over there to sample. We can say that it probably ends somewhere in between, and no one's thankfully asking us to put in any monitoring wells in a roadway.
Okay, I've actually monitored wells in a roadway in Indiana where I mentioned they make you go off site. I was in the middle of US 30, with a baling wire and all that, just trying to get my VOC samples out of the ground in the heat.
That really just makes me wonder, like, I've sampled from wells and thought, whose idea was it to put it here?
Oh, yeah.
When you have
That was
some other
probably the
options.
hairiest one. Cars are flying by on both sides, and trying to keep the string off the ground, doing the whole thing before low flow.
That actually sounds terrifying and like a safety moment. That is,
It was a safety moment for sure.
I've done, right of way. I mean, we definitely do install wells in the right of way when that's like as far over as you can go. But even then, you must stay off the road, people.
Agreed. Agreed. And
Yeah.
speaking of, public right of ways, in terms of public engagement, what strategies do you use to translate, technical data to community stakeholders? How do you put it in plain language?
So how do I communicate technical language to stakeholders? I think, I've been involved in a lot of sites and over the years in public meetings and oftentimes presentations to give to a larger group of people. And I think that's great as part of engagement. Absolutely. Like get, get in front of the community and share information. But I think to your point and of the question that it's not always easy to translate technical speak to, uh, in layman's terms and just to, really get the point across. And I think that one of the features of even those public meetings that I've been a part of that was, I would say, really effective was like the afterwards Q&A session, where it was more of a, like one-on-one or a smaller group and more of a conversational style of, explaining more specifics to a person and answering and directing, their direct questions and pulling from, maybe shared experiences or, just different examples. I think that a one-on-one is a really helpful way. Obviously, you don't always get that option, but whenever you can, that's better. I think, I said earlier about, getting access to those offsite properties. You can write a letter to someone and be like, on behalf of so-and-so, we would like to request access to, and, someone might respond, but you probably have a better chance of getting a positive response if you knock on the door and introduce yourself and share why and what it is that you're doing.
I would agree for sure.
Yeah.
So have you done it where it's kind of like community town halls and as well as door-to-door outreach in your
Hmm.
career?
Yeah.
Nice.
I
I
do
think,
think
go
yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say I like the one-on-one part better.
I bet. I mean, I haven't done much in terms of the environmental world in public town halls, but before we joined the podcast, you and I were both talking about our shared experience as urban homesteaders. And I was changing the law in a suburb of Chicago, so we were allowed to have chickens and I had to have town halls. And that was quite the interesting experience hearing, trying to explain why it's a good idea and then getting everyone's feedback. I'll never
Yeah.
forget the gentleman who stood up and gave the monologue about if you bring the chickens, then you bring the mice. And if you bring the mice, then the snakes come and nobody wants the snakes. And I was like, thank you, sir. It's a good
Thank
point.
you. Nobody wants the steaks. I
Yeah.
feel like, that's, that that seems a little dramatic, in terms of what one comes after the other.
It was a chain of events. He had it
It's a
all
chain
in
of events,
linear.
yeah.
I imagine it's probably a little more easygoing in the environmental public engagement as opposed to trying to get chickens in an urban area.
Well, except for the element of, like, if you hear there's contamination in the groundwater and
Yeah,
that
never
is
mind. Good
yeah,
point. Good
yeah.
point.
You're
Yeah.
like, "That's my groundwater," and so it actually and I have a lot of compassion in that space just because if you don't know the details, and not that I think news is always trying to sensationalize things, but, you might see a rather inflammatory, lead for like contamination in the ground, or
Yeah.
contamination in the sewers. And, if that's where there is contamination in the ground or the soil, or that there were vapors in the sewers. I mean, those things do happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's like imminent risk. And if there is, like, obviously that's being addressed, right away. But it's certainly a thing that can invoke fear and concern in people.
Yeah, you make a good point too, and I think the public awareness around environmental issues has grown for sure in the past few years, especially going back to like the Flint water crisis. I actually lived in Western Michigan before I moved to Missouri for a few years, and it was really big on the water crisis, and then PFAS was found. And you can see it now in the public's mind, the PFAS issue. And I think more and more the general public knows there are these issues, but don't quite understand the risk to them. To your point, and it can be scary, especially once it's sensationalized.
So I think it's
Like you out there, kind of explaining it.
well, and likewise, because I mean, even having a platform to discuss this in a podcast format, I think is part of making something that might otherwise not be as transparent. In this case, managing environmental cleanup or things like that. Just, what does that look like? What does waste management look like? And how does, what are these hazardous sites? What does that even mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think even, students, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but students studying geology or environmental science don't always have a good grasp. You do the academic, you learn about the rocks and fate and transport and physical geography, but you don't realize the real world implications of hazardous waste or a phase one or a corrective action or, what a big spill is.
I knew absolutely nothing. You mentioned a previous, bailing out a well in the middle of a road. When I started in this industry, I didn't know what a bailer was as the device that we use to sample, groundwater from these monitoring wells. And I was picturing like a string with a bucket attached. So, I mean, I learned a lot, but apparently I didn't learn that. I don't know, maybe I played hooky that day, but
No, I think you're not alone. I've actually been talking to a lot of folks in the industry about it, and there's a few schools that do a good job of like giving the Haswapper 40 and doing like a field training course, but many stick to the academic theory and the basics and the scientific basic, but nothing about the real world industry once you get out there of what you're going to do and how you do it for sure.
yeah, I think that let's change that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's kind of a side hobby goal of mine for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then, as far as community engagement goes, what role do you think it plays in successful remediation? Kind of the soft skills to the hard science skills, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you have people involved or stakeholders in a community, and when people are in the know, and you can address concerns as they come up, and I don't know, it just generally seems to make things just work more smoothly. You can really derail, a process if there's one of the stakeholders, whether that's a community member or, a client or a neighbor, or, is not on the same page or doesn't feel like where the process is going is in their best interest, or if they're just not aware. So I think, yeah, just it's important to keep your stakeholders and, well informed of the process and be proactive about communications, and yeah, and just, be clear in those, in the plans as well. And I think that's something that it's hard to project out, like how long will this cleanup take? People ask that all the time, and man, that's a question, because I can give you a range. We can talk about how long other things have taken, but it's just every cleanup is unique and every site is unique. There's no way to know that, and we don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball, so can't make it happen magically. Staying in communication amidst those uncertainties is key.
It's a good point. Really good point there for sure. Yeah, if one consultant can come up with that magic wand, I think you'd have more work than you could ever do in your lifetime and four others for that matter.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
So
believe anybody who tells you that they can anticipate that.
great advice from Babs Garcia. You heard it here
That's right.
on MWCC podcast. But moving on to, corrective action and risk. How do you design and evaluate an effective conceptual site model?
Mm,
Out those GIS skills and, go from there.
that's right. Well, first I consult the crystal ball. No,
Nice.
the Okay, so I love the even just the idea, conceptual site model, like from the very beginning of the very first time I go on site or I'm introduced to it, like I know I start forming in my mind, like that, where's the contamination? Is it in the soil? Is it in the groundwater? Is it in the bedrock? You start kind of like thinking about it. And I think it's because I am a visual person, like, you know, I'll make, a little cross section or something and just start thinking about, or even a map of an area. I mean, it really is, when we say conceptual, it doesn't have to stay conceptual in your mind, but it is an idea of where's their contamination, where are their receptors, where can that contamination get to? I was mentioning, the site where it was a pipeline, a fuel pipeline, and there was a creek at the bottom of the hills, so in your mind's eye, you picture that hillside and, the different layers of the geology that we're, referencing. We start to build that, I think, inherently and from the very beginning. And then every new bit of information that we get as part of an investigation adds to it. I got to that site with the pipeline and, didn't realize that the individual layers of different soil types were really, going to factor into what we were doing next. But after we observed that and saw it over and over again, hey, there's this like really extensive and laterally extensive clay horizon. Don't mess that up, don't cut through that. So that's our conceptual model, like being refined as you go. And then, like I said, the important thing is we want to know the what's there, where is it, but in order to move these like sites through an actual process, it's not like what's there. It's like, well, and who is there? So, is there a drinking water well nearby? Is there a spring or, a sensitive receptor, as we call it? Is there a daycare next door? You start like looking at how can that affect the people in this, and that's what we say. It's everything we're doing is protection of human health and the environment. So you start going through and looking at that, and that is actually all part of the conceptual site model process and the refining of it, and then adding in that exposure element, and then it's a conceptual site exposure model and
I
so
really
on.
appreciate you bringing in the human element too. It's not just, here's a graph, a map, horizon of your
Yeah,
soil and geology. There is the protection of not only the environment, but human health for what we do day in and day out. It's a good
absolutely.
point though. Definitely. And then when you get your conceptual site model out there and you've undertaken your remedial action, what's your best approach, or what do you think is the best approach for evaluating the effectiveness of that remedial action, especially when it comes to groundwater?
Well, I think it really varies, but I mean, in the end, anytime that we're doing a remedial action, hopefully we have an end goal in mind. So you design the remedy to meet some objective. So maybe I'm saying, I need the water that comes out of this treatment system, for instance, this needs to be drinkable. Well, that is a different standard, and it's going to look, the remedy to get there is going to look really different than I need this water to pass uh, a threshold of so that it can be accepted by a POTW and then go to a community wastewater treatment facility and then be discharged from there the way that all of the wastewater is discharged after being treated. Know what you're going for, and then you can then figure out how to get there.
Point. Really good point. And then quick side note as we're talking wastewater, what's your stance on the whole PFAS and biosolids? Have you looked into that at all? That's my own curiosity here.
Specifically in biosolids, no.
Yeah, and especially as it comes to land applied biosolids. I personally am in the camp that we should probably not be putting these on our farm fields till we know
Well,
better.
that's okay. Yeah, and because it's accumulating in the biosolids
Yep,
throughout the
it ends
treatment
up in the
system.
sludge, and then it gets put on farm fields, and, you've got places like in Michigan where they had to have a gentleman impound all of his cows and couldn't sell the meat or get rid of the cows, and it broke I mean, he went bankrupt, and, you have all these other impacts in Maine where they banned it outright. Minnesota just put out some regulations on how to manage it. So, some will say, you have all these biosolids from POTWs, so you gotta do something with them, and land applied is the best approach as opposed to landfill. I'm more conservative personally, but, it's an open and fair discussion. Curious, with your background, what do you think?
I mean, no, I think of all of the world of PFAS and where it's showing up and how we're dealing with it, it's just the next horizon. I'll be honest, I hadn't even thought about the land application for the sludges afterwards. So it's I'm sure that's a good topic for the next MWCC conference. I'd like to hear from some local operators. Yeah. What are they doing with the sludge then if you're not going land application route?
It's going to a landfill, which is also a problem. You're taking up landfill space. From what I understand, I'm not an expert in the matter. I know enough to be dangerous and have an opinion I'm willing to share and be challenged on. That's about that there. So yeah.
Well, if it's a sanitary landfill, then I'm probably happy to have it.
Yeah. So I feel like we could come up with some creative solutions for it, even if it's, like reclaim mine land. If you already got this heavily contaminated site and you need some sort of topsoil or something to grow trees on and have a protected forest, and I'm just spitballing here, but I feel like putting it on our farm fields is not the solution if it's got issues.
I like it. You're an idea guy, Jeff. You're like coming up with options.
Yeah, I try on a Monday afternoon. For sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then, looking ahead to just mentorship, what advice would you give to young professionals entering this space in the years ahead with, fun stuff like PFAS going out there and, AI coming in to take over some of our jobs? I just read an article on and you name it, the advancement of GIS and no more rasters.
Yeah, right. Well, I can honestly say, I can't even imagine what, yeah, how much things will change in the next 5 years. Just maybe that's a lack of imagination, but also, I thought I was like, "Okay, I'm tracking," then very quickly, like, "Oh, man, things are," the landscape is changing a lot. I think I did it's probably like a silly online survey, 8 years ago that was like, "What are the chances that your job will be affected by, the coming AI?" And it's like, "Oh, geologist, like, nope, you're real hands-on, you don't have to worry about it." But, there's still a lot of even, like, what I'm doing that I see where people are going online and typing in something to figure out what their environmental compliance should look like. I don't necessarily trust that. Yeah. Hot take, don't necessarily, don't use that for your environmental compliance in a vacuum. But yeah, so I think maybe it's a little bit not at the cutting edge of like the technological side, but advice that I would give to someone entering into environmental consulting specifically is, we still do need to evaluate and process the information that we're getting, and let's not leave that all to the AI. And get a mentor early on, and hopefully someone that you've really who's interested in sharing the information that they have, because I mean something that I'm seeing in like my generation and the generation that preceded me is there's a lot of people retiring and institutional knowledge about things is being lost. And so uh let's not trust so much that it's all you know in the technology that we can retrieve that. So um yeah, get a mentor, get plugged in and learn what you can from people who have been, doing this for a longer time and are willing and able to share that information. And for me, actually, it was really helpful as I found a mentor early on who not only like loves to like teach and share information, didn't mind the fact that I just asked a billion questions all the time. Was just really willing to, uh, you know, he was very patient and worked well with at least my way of thinking and learning.
I couldn't agree with you more on all of that advice. And, I think also one thing to note is AI won't be swinging one of those sweet geologist hammers anytime soon either.
That's right. That'll take it out of my cold, dead hands.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. No, but that is great advice in terms of not just trusting into the technology, and a mentorship is huge. So if any young folks out there listening need a good mentor, Environmental Works may have an internship program. I'm not sure,
We
but
do. We
Babs
do.
Garcia sure think she'd be a good mentor to me. Just saying.
Yes.
So, that in mind, what's next for you, Babs?
Oh, what's next? Well, that was actually kind of fun. Even being here is part of like the next part of my career. At the beginning of this year, kind of switched from I've been a client manager, project manager, program manager for all this time. And I'm like, we do a lot of different stuff here. And I kind of I want to get out there and be more involved in my community and, you know, sell the work that we do to a larger audience. So yeah, it's actually a part of the next phase of my career of kind of synthesizing the information that I have, that I've gleaned in different parts of what consulting can look like. And instead of being necessarily the doer, on the receiving end of that, trying to help get out there and find people where there's a need and we match and we can do the thing that they need. And so that's what I'm trying to work on now, and I'll let you know how that goes.
Nice, nice. I think I heard well, for those who don't know, I'm a salesperson by trade now, even though I started off as a consultant and I'm in sales in the laboratory world and marketing. But I heard a good quote recently that at a high enough level in any organization, everybody's in sales.
Everybody's right.
It's not a negative thing either, like you're selling your expertise in the ways you can help.
Absolutely. And enough about the landscape to, yeah, know how to get things plugged in.
Nice. Well, I wish you the best in this next budding phase of your
Absolutely.
career for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. And then, like, what environmental trends are you watching most closely right now?
What
Any thoughts
trends
on
am I?
biosolids?
Yeah, right. Apparently not. I missed the memo on that one. No, I think at the beginning of the year, I was like really like watching, you know, executive orders coming out of Washington just at a breakneck speed. Really curious on how that was going to affect things. And it's intriguing how, some things have changed and some were put on hold or didn't have that immediate effect. And actually, I'm kind of interested in seeing how industries kind of, I say self regulate, but where initiatives maybe had been top down before, but you can see all over the place, companies who have a sustainability initiative or they have their own metrics that they want to meet. And so it's not that they have to have zero carbon footprint because of, or not going to achieve it because of regulatory requirements necessarily, but because they're like, hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we're communicating to our stakeholders and to our customers and our employees of the type of company that we are. And as I have a personal interest in that, I just think it's fascinating to me that it's, there's a maybe inappropriate or inadequate like representation of like, oh, companies would only do the environmental things that they have to do and not the extra. Maybe that's never fully been the case, but it's certainly not the case. There's a lot of places where they are identifying the objectives of having certain environmental, like I said, sustainability is one that really comes to mind. So I don't know if I'm necessarily watching the trend or just more intrigued to see it from the sidelines.
And you bring up an interesting and good point. I too was watching it pretty closely. I started the year off working in the equipment space and then moved back to the laboratory side of the business. But everyone had that like moment of pause, I feel like, from January through April, May-ish. And now you see it shake out. And into your insightful point that you did make, I think industries, you mentioned like they have a certain PR, if you will. They have certain goals for the stakeholders and how they engage the public. And 45 years on past RECRA, regardless of the top-down dictates from the federal government, there's still liability. And I think companies and the environmental practice has developed and matured to the point in the legal side as well, where people realize like this can change in 3 years and then we're going to be sued out of
Oh yeah.
existence. I mean, so you get it on both the PR good feel side and the smart business side where you're seeing this self-regulation from my vantage point, at least, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, the liability and recognizing that the shift happens, especially in Washington. So I'm also intrigued by and think it's, a lot of company or municipalities or quasi-governmental utilities, they have these plans don't change. If you've started construction on, a big project, I mean, these are a long time in the coming and a long time in the production. It's not subject to the whims of changing in the moment. So I don't know, maybe I take a little bit of comfort in that.
Same here, for sure. It's been interesting to watch and continue to watch too as these next couple of years go on, I think. So, and then,
Interesting
this has been
times.
what was that?
Interesting times.
Oh yeah, that's almost an understatement for sure. So, and it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. Appreciate your time joining us here. Before we wrap up, just a few final questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So, where can people learn more about your work and connect with you?
Well, obviously, environmental works, you can reach out to me there. I can share the contact information with my email and phone number, and I'd love to hear from folks. I am on LinkedIn too, so, and unless you're, obviously trying to sell me something, purchase my name, I usually will accept those. So yeah, you can find me just Babs Garcia.
Nice. And as a sales guy, I'm glad you're actually talking to me right now. I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's all right. Well, what
No,
it's like I have no connection with that.
no, I get it. Totally get it. For sure. And if it's okay with you, we'll publish your contact info in the show notes so people
Absolutely.
can get a hold of you. Definitely. And then, is there a resource, book, or experience that's been especially influential in your career?
Resource book. Okay, so I do have maybe something that a resource experience. A couple of years ago, we did. It's called like the DISC, DISC
Oh, I
assessment.
know it all too well,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
I'm an
right.
I. for the record.
Oh, yeah, shocking, right? A salesperson that's an I? Well, guess what? So am I.
Nice. It's a very easy
Um,
conversation.
it's yeah, it makes for easy conversations. We're good to have at parties. We'll talk to everyone. I actually thought it was really helpful because I I maybe I had done like some like personality assessments before, but probably just like something online, and it was helpful, it was informative, but I think more so that like several as a company we were taking it and then we were talking about like the different styles. So you could start to really identify like the people who are D. So for people who don't know, like DISC, and it stands for it's like direct or driven,
Dominance.
dominance. Those are, that's, a lot of CEOs. They're like, it's no nonsense. Those are the people you walk into a meeting, they're going to start the meeting doing it where you're like, we got things to get to. Um, and like the I is probably going to be like, hey, how was your weekend? To probably more talkative, more extroverted. And, like, so it's based off of like active versus a people focus or extroversion, kind of introversion.
Introversion. Yeah.
So it was interesting as a tool to learn about myself and like, my strengths. I remember looking at that and being like, oh, I'm like really kind of low on the C, but I'm a scientist. Am I supposed to be like high there? Like, isn't that supposed to be my zone?
I think our
And it's,
industry is dominated by C's, if I have to be honest, and the little S and the D's for sure. We I's are few and far between in my experience.
we're not as represented. And so, yeah, believe it or not, like I didn't even think about the fact that as a I like that there's value in that. I'm like, oh, that's just that thing about me that's a little obnoxious that I am outgoing, but it actually helps at work. And I think, even talking about my responses to some of your questions about the community engagement and talking with regulators, like, I want to have those conversations. I'm not dreading it. I'm, I more easily leaning into that. So I thought it was a helpful thing to do to learn about that, and also helped me to recognize when someone like different styles so I can modify or at least adapt a little bit to meet that, because that's important too, is like meet people where they are.
100%. I can remember doing it the first time years ago as a salesperson, and I'd get into a meeting. I'm outgoing, fast talking, boisterous, and you get a real stoic, statistical, analytical person, and like I'm asking open-ended questions, and they're answering yes or no, and I'm just squirming in my seat. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And now
Yeah.
I can recognize that and kind of moderate myself and kind of try and meet someone where they are, as you noted, for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes I moderate myself by saying, I don't have to be the one that answers that question.
Oh
Like,
yeah, you got
let
to get
other
comfortable with
people.
10 seconds of silence.
Shocking.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, for those who didn't catch it, it's a DISC assessment, and I would agree. I lead a team. I'm fortunate to lead a great team of 8 folks, and I think we're going to do it as a team just to kind of get a better grasp of the dynamics there for
Nice.
sure.
Recommend
So,
it.
yeah, definitely. And then in one sentence, why is MWCC an important organization for environmental professionals in Missouri, in your opinion?
Okay. One sentence. One run-on sentence. No,
Sure, you could put a semicolon in there, maybe not the M dash, in the age of AI,
that's
but
all right. Actually, I love WCC is like, obviously it's an institution at this point, been around for a long time, and I believe in the value of the networking opportunities that provides, and just ongoing, training or resources. And it's one-stop shop.
Agreed. Agreed. You meet great people, you learn awesome stuff, and you kind of broaden your horizons as a professional individual in something like the MWCC, in my opinion.
That's right. Well, and I didn't even get to add Margaritaville in my response. Missed
That's
opportunity.
the secret that you could tell folks if you really want them to join. Be like, hey, there's this great conference at Margaritaville.
It's a good conference.
Well, I get to go to conferences throughout the Midwest, and it's definitely one of my favorites for sure, if
Nice.
not favorite. So, well,
Well, I
thanks
look
again.
forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, sure. You'll find me in the Eurofins booth, I'm sure. Shameless plug for Eurofins real quick. But thanks for being the guest today. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to getting this out there for the public. Folks, if you're out there and you want to get in touch with Babs, we'll have her contact information below in the show notes. And also be sure to follow the MWCC and look to join as a member at mowastecoalition.org, also in the show notes. So with that, Babs, thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you in person someday, and you have a great day. Take care.
Likewise.